In this lesson, we'll use the XML component to bring in a live Twitter feed. I'm also going to show you how to mix in animation and include images from Twitter, and we're going to finish the presentation by showing you how to add touch control to your Twitter feed. So let's begin. So the first thing I'll do is switch over here to my scene editors from the navigation, and I'll go ahead and add a new scene. Call this our Twitter scene. Press enter. So in the first example, we're going to use the XML component slideshow mode to simply show one tweet after the next. So we're going to connect to the CNN Breaking News Twitter account and show the latest 60 updates from CNN. So if you wanted to change and not connect to a CNN Breaking News Twitter, but actually to a different Twitter account, you would simply change over here the characters just after the / with your own Twitter account, and that would give you your information, your XML source feed for the Twitter account you're interested in. Also, you can control how many tweets you're actually pulling. So as I mentioned, we're going to use a slideshow mode, and we're going to switch from one tweet to the next. And so right here, we're looking at 60 tweets. Now let's say you just want to show the latest 5 tweets from CNN. You would simply change this to 5. And again, now you're just looking at the latest 5 tweets from CNN and not 60. So again, you can control how many tweets with the count parameter. Now, each time somebody tweets, it's broken down into a single status block. So let me go ahead and minimize the block so you can kind of see how it's laid out. And again, we can expand a single status to get information of that single tweet. Now let's go ahead and review really quick what information do we want to pull out of this tweet. And so the two pieces of information that we're interested in, first is going to be the text, which is going to be right here. So we're going to pull up the text information of the actual tweet, the actual subject. And the second thing that we're interested in is going to be the image of the person that actually posted a tweet. Now in the case of CNN, it's always going to be the same image because it's always CNN that's posting the tweets. But if you have a Twitter account that has multiple people tweeting into it, you would have multiple images. And so to get this profile image URL, you'll actually need to get the path of user.profile_image_URL because this image URL resides below the user, so you'll actually need to use the dot notation. So let's go ahead and proceed by configuring our XML item. So now over here we're back to our Signage Studio, and we've created the Twitter scene earlier. So let's go ahead and switch to components, and under components we'll drag over the XML item to the scene, place it just about here, and we'll go ahead and add one more XML item and add it just after. The first XML item will be our image, so we'll go over here to the properties of the item and change this to be the resource. We'll make it a little bit smaller. And over here under the field name, we'll go ahead and paste in user.profile_image_URL. So that's the path that I showed you earlier. Now as far as the URL base for the resource for the image, we don't have to put anything since CNN uses absolute paths for its images. But if it used relative paths, we can complete the relative path into an absolute path with the URL base. Next, we'll switch to our second XML item. And I'll go ahead and make a little bit more room here. And for this, we'll go ahead and put in just text because as I showed you earlier from the XML source, the element that we need to grab is called text. So we'll go ahead and match that and change the color of the font, make the fonts a bit bigger, and just make this whole thing wider. So now that we've properly configured our XML item, let's go ahead and use the XML component and demo this. So we'll switch to the timelines. Go over to components, go to XML player and put it on the timeline. Double click to load up its properties. We'll go over here to the scenes, drag our Twitter scene to the properties of the XML component. Next, I'll go ahead and paste in the address of Twitter, the one that we used earlier, and we'll go ahead and use a count of 60 for a total of 60 latest tweets. Next, we need to provide the items path, and the items path is going to be the item in the XML source that repeats itself over and over. By default, you always skip the root tag, so statuses you skip because again that's the root tag, and status would be the items path that repeats itself over and over. So we'll go over here to the items path and just type in status, and as soon as I do that, you can see that the information is beginning to load. Now by default, we have an interval for the slideshow of every 5 seconds, so we'll go ahead and set this to 3 seconds. And so every 3 seconds, we're going to go from one status to the next. Let's go ahead and make a little bit more room here and review this. So we'll just go ahead and click on play on the timeline. And you can see that every 3 seconds we get a new tweet, and again the image is the same because all these tweets are made from CNN. Now let's go ahead and make it a little bit more interesting and add some animation. So we'll select our text and go to the properties, common properties, and set the alpha to dynamic. And so what we'll do is set so on the first point, or when the text first loads, it'll actually be set to alpha of 0, so it'll have no opacity. And for the second point, we'll go ahead and set a duration of half a second and a full opacity, so alpha will be at 100%. We're also going to set up an easing so the effect will have an elastic movement to it. So we're going to select the out elastic big. And then also, once the tweet has been displayed, we actually want it to fade out, or actually blur out. So what we'll do is we'll go over here to the blur effect, go to dynamic, and we pretty much want to start with no blur, so we'll set it to be 0 for the first point. And then on the second point, we're going to wait actually 3 seconds before kicking in the effect. We want the effect to actually run for half a second, so it's going to be very quickly. So what's going to happen is that initially you'll have no blur, there's going to be a 3-second delay, and then for half a second you'll have a quick blur in both the XY coordinates. And we'll put a pretty high blur value for both XY coordinates. So we switch back to the timeline. Let's click on play to preview the effect that we've added. And you can notice that there's a quick elastic alpha on the fade in, and then there's a blur fade out. So as you can see, it's very simple to add animation to XML data that you bring in from an external source. And so far we've covered the slideshow mode of the XML component. Now let's go ahead and jump in and talk about the interactive mode for the XML component. And another great feature of the XML component is the ability to change the data source on the fly. So for example, you can be looking at one Twitter account, and on the fly you can change the data source and look at another Twitter account. So we'll go ahead and settle this up and show you how this works. So let's go ahead and add a new scene. And this time we're not going to put the XML player component on the timeline. We'll actually embed the XML player component inside the scene. So we're going to go ahead and call this our XML wrapper. Press enter, make the scene a little bit bigger. Next, select the XML player, go to its properties, switch to the scenes, and drag and drop the Twitter scene onto the properties of the XML component to bind the scene directly onto the XML player. Next, we'll go ahead and put the URL for CNN just like before, and change the items path to status just like before. And remember, right now again we're looking at the XML player component, and we can also see the scene that's embedded inside of it, which is again the CNN scene that we've dragged and bound to this particular XML player. Next, we'll switch over to the resources and drag over a couple of images. And so we'll use these array images to cycle through the different items in the XML. We're also going to switch to components and drag over a couple of labels. Copy and paste this label so it looks exactly the same. And with this label, we're actually going to load the Fox News. And so again, the purpose of this configuration is that we can cycle through the items back and forth and load both CNN and Fox News on the fly. Now let's go ahead and make each button and each label an interactive object. So click on it, go to definitions, and make it interactive. Now we'll select the XML player, go to its properties, and under events, we'll go ahead and add 4 events, and use the target icon to bind to each one of the buttons and labels. Next, let's go ahead and set the commands. So for the left, we can go previous page, which is actually the previous item. next page or next item for the right. For the CNN, we're going to set load URL, and for the Fox, also load URL. Next, we'll go ahead and paste in the URLs. So for CNN, we're going to use the same URL that we have used previously. And for the Fox, it's actually going to be the same URL, but the only difference is going to be right here where it says foxnews.xml. Next, let's go ahead and save our work. So now let's go ahead and do the most important thing and set the XML player to interactive mode instead of a slideshow mode. So go to its properties under general and take off the slideshow mode. So next, let's go ahead and test this out and see how it works. Click on the play on the timeline to load the presentation, and then we can use the arrow keys to go back and forth and cycle through the different XML items. And again, we can click on the load Fox News to change the XML data source, and again cycle through the items. And you can see that as soon as we let go, the effects will kick in and fades in and fades out. And now we can go ahead and change the data source again and go back to CNN. So I hope you enjoyed this video tutorial, and if you have any questions, be sure to let us know. Thank you.